Okay, we're back now, part two, talking about the consequences or cyber espionage along the way. Cyber espionage, it's becoming a growing problem. This involves the deployment of malware that secretly steals data on the computer systems of your organization. So, most often the criminal is after the data that can provide for them an unfair competitive advantage to both themselves and or to the organization they're trying to sell it to. Some examples would be sales and marketing, maybe new product development, non-public information such as mergers would be useful. What about employees' personal information that can be sold on the black web? Customer data, who are your customers, who should we go after, and that sort of thing. Excuse me. It is a concern, and you want to take steps to prevent it. Cyber terrorism, on the other hand, is the intimidation of a government or civilian population by using information technology to disable critical national infrastructure. That would be the cable network for communications, any of your cable providers. It would include the energy industry, transportation industry, financial, law enforcement, emergency response, or healthcare, right? These are all part of critical information systems that we need up and running all the time. And so cyber terrorism is an increasing concern for countries and organizations around the globe, right? Because there's a direct impact to the organization for what the asset that is stolen and its value that it provides, right? And it creates a great deal of business disruption, including recovery costs, legal consequences, reputational damage. Millions and millions and millions of dollars will be spent. There are organizations that are designed to help you with this. One is the Department of Homeland Security. It's a large federal agency, stood up after 9/11. It's got more than 240,000 employees, and it has a budget of about $65 billion. If you're looking for a job, that's a good place to go. And its whole purpose is to make America a more safer place to be, resilient to terrorism and cyber terrorism as well. There's also a subset of the Department of Homeland Security called U.S. CERT, or the U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team. You might want to check them out. There's a partnership between DHS and the public through U.S. And private sectors through U.S. CERT. Now, there are consequences of a successful attack, and there are these consequences continue, right? And here's kind of a picture of it. We've all seen this iceberg picture before, but this is an interesting approach. There are direct costs to a business, but then you can imagine indirect costs that are not often seen by everybody in the organization. Loss of existing business or customers, loss of potential new business and customers, right? We're out to grow, and that can be inhibited. Or diversion of resources as we scramble to operate some sort of backup systems, etc. And we mentioned the legal consequences, noting the prospect of monetary penalties for the business that fail to comply with any of the data protection legislation. What about reputational damage, right? That is a successful cyber attack can erode the trust that an organization has established with customers, suppliers, other businesses, stakeholders, etc. Now, to that end, there are multiple laws in place now. Federal laws that can be used for prosecuting computer attacks. So, over the years, the Congress has enacted any number of laws, we'll show them on these slides, to help prosecute those responsible for computer-related crimes. excuse me, I did post on the Moodle site, U.S. Patriot Act, for example. You might want to check that out. Now, before I go any further, I just want to take a quick review of where we've been so far. I want you to be aware of that a zero-day attack refers to an attack that takes place before the security community becomes aware, right, and has a fix for it. That a botnet describes a large group of computers that are controlled from one or more remote locations by the hackers. And I mentioned that a botnet is often used as part of a DDoS attack, a larger DDoS attack. That cyber espionage is referring to the deployment of malware that's secretly stealing data in the computer systems of your organization, right? We've talked about data breach quickly, right, which referred to an unintended release of sensitive data or the access of that sensitive data by individuals that are unauthorized. And then I just wanted to note that business disruption is what we're trying to avoid. And business disruption describes the result of a successful cyber attack that makes it impossible for an organization to operate in an effective manner for several hours or days, whatever the case may be. Now back to federal laws. That was a good review of where we've been and where we're going. Back to federal laws. There's the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which addresses fraud and related activities associated with computers. So basically, I don't have the right to scan or penetrate my neighbor's computer, right? I don't have the right to steal their passwords. There's also the federal law that is fraud and related activity in connection with access devices statute. This covers false claims regarding unauthorized use of credit cards. There's the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act, which has penalties as described here. The there's the Stored Wire and Electronic Communications and Transactional Records Access Statutes, right, which focuses on unlawful access to stored communications, right, which would include data. The U.S. Patriot Act, as I mentioned, I posted a link to that on the site if you'd like to review it for yourself. So there you go. Those are some of the federal laws that are working together. We're going to have some more of that conversation here in just a few minutes. Now, the whole point, the whole focus of cybersecurity is CIA. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It forms a triad, like a triangle. All have to be equal and all have to be secure, or the triangle begins to break down, right? So CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is confidentiality, like encryption, is going to ensure that only those individuals with the proper authority can access the sensitive data. Integrity is going to ensure that only those authorized individuals can change the data so that the accuracy and trustworthiness is guaranteed. And availability means that the data can be accessed when and where it's needed, including during disaster recovery times. Okay, so this is known as the CIA triad. Okay, here is a picture of it, and you can see on this picture the various aspects that we've talked about already: ransomware, data breach, other attacks, cyber espionage. It's a good summary slide in that regard. And so security measures must be planned for, would be my emphasis here. They have to be designed and implemented and tested and maintained at the we've already talked about these various levels: the organizational level, the network level, the application level, and the end user level. So as an information secure systems professional, you're focused on the organization, the network, the application, and the end user levels, ensuring CIA is applied to all of them throughout. That would be my emphasis there. And so to do this, you need a security strategy, right? So, excuse me. CIA begins at the organizational level and requires several tasks to set a sound foundation for future CIA-related actions, right? And you end up eventually with this layered approach through the end user, through the application, through the business, through the organization approach to cybersecurity and the network, right? You end up with this layered approach. We call that defense in depth. So we'll start with a risk assessment, and then we'll, based on that risk assessment, we'll do a probability and impact. What's the likelihood that this system will go down, and what's the impact if it does? If it's small dollars, who cares, right? But if it's high dollars, if it's a high revenue generating system, yeah, then we want to take action, and we want to define a disaster recovery plan based on this business impact assessment, which will give us a risk assessment. So this would be a business impact assessment. Then we would build a disaster recovery plan, and we would make sure that we create security policies that go around that, and then regularly audit those policies. Are those controls still in place and being followed? That's critical. A lot of businesses, remember, this whole conversation started out in week 1, people, processes, technology, right? That we sometimes add technology without adding the people. And I've seen organizations turn off alerts because they didn't have the manpower to manage them, right? That's what we want to do audits. That's not what the business paid for, and it's not part of their risk equation along the way. So as you're implementing this security strategy, some of the things you'd want to look at are things that we've talked about already. You'd want to look at a data breach, right? And this is how you would define your probability, right? Right here, probability and impact in terms of cost. And you can come up with a risk number that helps you prioritize your risks. I'm not going to go through all of those, but it is a good set of things to assess. So this company had said data breaches were number 1 based on the ranking by the probability and times impact. A DDoS attack was next. That email attachments that may have harmful viruses or worms was next. Harmful viruses, period, in any type system, even a Trojan horse. And invoice and payment is how they prioritized their organization. So that's where they would put their money to support their assets that are revenue generating along the way. Okay, so it's a great treatment of how to prioritize risk. You can't address everything in 1 year, but by taking that approach, you're able now to begin to take steps year after year to create that layered defense in-depth approach. So there are a number of legal acts that help you implement CIA across your organization. The Bank and Security Act is one I wanted to touch on. The European Union, or we call it GDPR for short, if you're managing European data, even in a U.S. system. The FISMA, Federal Information Security Management Act, is one that I deal with daily, as well as Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, it's sometimes referred to as short, and HIPAA is another common one, as well as the payment card industry. Every time you swipe your credit card, you are protected because companies must get an approved ROC, they call it, or report on compliance. The banks will approve or they won't lend the banks the money and process the payment. So your credit cards should be protected.